Welcome back to the Panel's Choice. Here we ask each panel member to pick a topic from this week that they feel is important to discuss. Let's start with Donna's pick. Critical race theory is a hot topic right now as states like Iowa pass legislation to target the teaching of critical race theory and other concepts in government diversity trainings and classroom curriculums. One Iowa teacher posted a number of video clips urging her colleagues to go against the newly signed law. Take a look at this.
I can't teach anything divisive. I can't teach critical race theory. And I can't teach about racial equity. This is at all public schools, colleges, and universities. So, teachers, in the past, we've been activists. After the of last year, we really need to stand up and do what's right for our kids right now. So this is a call to action, teachers. We got to stand up and fight for our kids because this is... we can't lie to them.
Donna, a lot of emotion there, insight into what our teachers are thinking. Very interesting.
Well, what our teachers are thinking is giving themselves cover because the school systems are failing. So now, instead of saying the students are failing because you have inadequate teaching, you have teachers that will have a 70% failure rate year after year, now they can just blame it on the kids and say that they're insubordinate, they're inferior, that's math and English and science is racist. This is just a way for them to cover themselves because we all know that critical race theory says that there's inferior and superior people. And now teachers can do their jobs even less because now they can just blame it on the students and their marginalization, that why these kids aren't learning. And you know, this is awful because every parent should be against that, because the bottom line is critical race theory creates the very racism that they claim to be trying to overcome.
Well, it's a very interesting issue, and we'll probably hear a lot more about it. As a matter of fact, Terry, you also chose critical race theory as your topic this week. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas introduced the Stop CRT Act in response to increasing concerns among Americans about the proliferation of critical race theory in education and the workplace. Terry, tell us your thoughts.
Well, I'm very excited. You know, I think Tom Cotton is a senator that's been undervalued over the past 2 years, and he's really started to step up. And
undervalued? I read and hear about him all over the place. How could he possibly be undervalued? The guy is everywhere.
Keep in mind, he was first elected in 2014. I mean, he's really starting to, you know, get a pace that's going, and he's stepping up to the challenges that America is facing right now. And he's introduced this Stop CRT bill, which would essentially do three things. It would ban federal funding for any K through 12 schools that promote or endorse critical race theory. It'd do the same thing for colleges. But then it also, thirdly, would codify President Trump's executive order that banned critical race theory from federal jobs training programs. So it's a big bill. It's really important. These are going on right now at the state level, and it's good that Tom Cotton is not responding to those voices in the mainstream media from the teachers unions like Randy Weingarten, who are trying to tell us that critical race theory just isn't happening. It's not happening in schools. It's not being taught. We all know it's not
true. Well, if you
true.
don't pay attention, it's not happening. So that's probably part of it, though.
That's exactly right. If you're not paying attention, it's not happening. And I'm just glad that he's got the courage to stand up and step into this issue that is very difficult. I mean, it's difficult to talk about race in this country because either way, you're going to get branded as a racist.
One thing I thought was interesting is Tom Cotton, I think, he was one of the first to sort of peg this critical race theory in the Department of Defense in the armed services, which is an interesting sort of a take on this, how that sort of crept into the training programs in the Department of Defense, and I think is somewhat worrisome to a lot of people who are active duty in the military. Let's see. Next, we have Malik's pick. After hearing that a Pennsylvania senator has initiated an in-depth investigation into the 2020 election in the Commonwealth, Joe Biden changed his travel plans and went to Pennsylvania to curb the narrative on the voting laws being passed in many states.
17 states have enacted not just proposed, but enacted 28 new laws to make it harder for Americans to vote. Not to mention, and catch this, nearly 400 additional bills Republican members of the state legislatures are trying to pass. The 21st century Jim Crow assault is real.
Those are some, I would say, incisive and perhaps those words are very, I think, targeted to the emotions of a lot of people, and the language was very strong. I'm reminded of that Shakespearean line, "He doth protest too much," though, because I think this was a very interesting speech. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's typical, it's like part and parcel of Democratic politics, you know, fear and loathing, that's the thing. And when you play to the emotions of people, whether it's any group, whether that's women, gays, Hispanic community, the black community, particularly with the Democratic Party, this is something that has been extremely successful, making us, it's almost like re-traumatizing us all over again. Now, Jim Crow, now we know that things like Plessy v. Ferguson, that pretty much enshrined separate but equal in the Constitution. We know that there were things like one-drop rule laws in Arkansas. We also know that there was things like FDR's, Democratic President FDR's, the Federal Housing Authority, the redlining that came after that. People like my mom to this day, I'm from Mississippi, she still talks about sneaking to drink water out of the whites only fountain in Mississippi because she wanted to know whether or not the water, it tastes the same. Obviously it did. That's Jim Crow.
And that was real.
And that was real. What we're talking about here is eliminating 24-hour voting, eliminating drive-through voting that were implemented in response to a pandemic, people not being able to vote in person. So voter ID laws that they're complaining about, voter IDs that have been in effect, particularly in Georgia, Florida, and Texas, they already had in-person voter ID requirements.
As well as Delaware, by the way.
As well as Delaware. What they did, they extended that ID requirement to absentee ballots. So much like here in Washington, D.C., if I were to request an absentee ballot here in Washington, D.C., I have to show an identification. That's what they did. But Joe Biden, if you listen to Joe Biden of the 1994 crime bill, he's comparing that to Jim Crow. It's irresponsible, but it's a very successful tactic that Democrats use all the time.
Successful. What's interesting, I think, though, is that he has actually taken the president is stepping out and is talking about this, and apropos of this audit in Arizona, it seems to me. And it seems to me that it's a sign that perhaps the Democrats are panicking a little bit because they see the conservatives getting some traction on this argument. They see public opinion beginning to shift. Maybe that's why he decided he had to go to Pennsylvania. I don't know. And last, but certainly not least, is Andrew's pick. The Biden administration is refusing to explicitly identify communism for goodness sakes, as the reason why Cubans are protesting. Take a look at this.
These protesters are yelling freedom and enough. There are people within the administration who think they are saying freedom from rising COVID cases.
Again, I would say that when people are out there in the streets protesting and complaining about the lack of access to economic prosperity, to the medical supplies they need, to a life they deserve to live, that can take on a range of meanings. There's a global pandemic right now. Most people in that country don't have access to vaccines. That certainly is something we'd love to help with.
I don't know about you, but whenever I hear from Jen Psaki, don't you feel calm and reassured? I mean, don't you just kind of...
Not exactly. I would tell you
sort of
that
zen?
we need to, look, we need to recognize this for what it is, and it is a stark reminder that the National Democratic Party has chosen to be on the side of tyrants. And we see that in terms of the policies that they are implementing domestically. Look, we have political prisoners in this country that have been there for several months, incarcerated for several months. Now, when we take a look at what's going on in Cuba, you hear these protesters talking about liberty. They're talking about freedom. They're waving the American flag, just as the protesters in Hong Kong did. These are, and they're doing it as a symbol of freedom. Now, in this country, especially with what's been going on in the last 36 months or so, but it's been underway for a very long time, the flag has become supposedly this symbol of tyranny, of suppression. We need to recognize that the Biden administration will not support these Cubans, will not support any sort of freedom effort unless they're forced to. Now, that is the lot that we have to deal with for the time that the administration is in place.
But that's not what Jen Psaki says.
Well, Jen Psaki, I think, is doing a poor job of spinning what her own administration, what her president has really believes, and at least what his handlers believe, which is that freedom, unfettered freedom, the ability to express yourself in a way politically is something that is a danger to regimes, and it must be suppressed and treated with suspicion. And that's another reason, last point, that's another reason why, even though our southern border is completely open, the administration has come out this week saying that Cuban refugees fleeing actual tyranny and seeking asylum, that they will be turned away.
It's an interesting change in policy. Very, very significant, I think. Well, very good. When we come back from the break, we've got this week's Don't Be Fooled and the closing argument. Don't go anywhere.